This might be controversial. The day of the knowledge worker is really dead. Those days are really going away because we're automating a lot of that. AI is coming in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, TJ Walia, and today's guest is a distinguished leader in the field of information technology, digital strategy, and brings a wealth of experience spearheading transformative changes and driving digital innovation across diverse sectors. His name is Robbie Madan. Robbie is not only an incredible leader in the space, but he's also a friend of mine where we crossed paths several years ago and remained in touch since then. With a robust background in technology, strategic IT planning, and business process re-engineering, Robbie currently spearheads a large-scale tech transformation at Canada One Auto, emphasizing superior service delivery and strategic IT initiatives. Before his role at Canada One Auto, Robbie held the position of Chief Information and Digital Officer at SNDL Inc., where he led significant digital initiatives, including ERP transformations, cloud migrations, and the development of retail mobile apps, contributing profoundly to the technological advancements of the company's diverse business segments. Robbie's career also includes impactful tenure at Microsoft, where he managed client accounts across the country, providing strategic insights for technology implementations that enhance business operations. His commitment extends beyond professional pursuits. He is a dedicated volunteer and a leading figure in several technology and community-focused organizations. He currently resides in Edmonton, Alberta with his family, contributing to both local and international tech communities. Robbie, welcome to TTalks.
Thanks for having me, TJ. This has been a long time coming.
Absolutely has. I know we've been planning this for several months, if not weeks, and I'm so glad to have you. I'm super excited. Because most of our guests and listeners don't know the connection that you and I have because we've worked alongside one another. So I've gone through what your history has been, Robbie, but I'd love for you to kind of share your journey, because we met at a point in Microsoft, and then you came in and you did what you had to do, you cleaned up and you left, and it was just like, all right, I'm on to next things. But I'd love to understand your journey before Microsoft. And then after Microsoft, because you skyrocketed right after that from my perspective, and what we saw, that growth that you had. So I'd love for our listeners to understand what that is. So please take it away, Robbie.
No, I appreciate that. It was actually very interesting. I think my journey is a bit unique to what a lot of CIOs or executives have experienced in their career in the technology industry. I actually started as a developer. That's where I really kind of gained my entrance into the tech industry, graduated from the U of A with a comp sci degree. And the first thing I wanted to do, and the only thing on my mind at that point in time, was to be a developer. I want to build things. And so I started my career off with essentially developing websites, developing integrations to different systems, and just working with different clients, big and small, to really develop whatever their dream or their vision was. That was what I was building at the time. I had a massive passion for development. I love coding. I love programming things. And that's really where I really got into technology. And I started joining a lot of different consulting companies, because my background prior to Microsoft, I worked for almost all of the major consulting companies. I also started my own consulting company at one point with a partner. We grew that to about 20 consultants. And as I kind of did that transformation, I really started realizing that, it wasn't just development that I enjoyed. It was also building teams and helping and coaching and mentoring younger developers to bring their skill set up. I think you talked a little bit about where we started connecting and where we joined. And after starting that consulting company, I decided to take a little bit of a break, and Microsoft came calling. So I decided to join there and see what that was all about. And that's really kind of where I would say my change from being a developer and programmer turned into more of where I took it down the management stream. When I joined Microsoft, I was helping a lot of the clients across Canada work on how did they develop better software with the Microsoft technology stack. But it was still really driven by the software development practices, right? So I was still kind of just coaching and mentoring down the developer path. But what I realized as I started interacting with all those clients, and obviously Microsoft having a lot of the Fortune 500 companies as their clients, was that there was often a disconnect between the technology side of those businesses and the actual business itself. Like I would go in there, coach and mentor development teams, but then at the end of the day, they didn't really understand why they were even building the software. How are they contributing back to the actual business and adding business value? And that's when I stood back and said, you know what I really want to do with my career and where I really want to go is to ensure that businesses understand the value of technology, not just from a software development perspective, but from all of technology, right? Whether that's the infrastructure, what benefit are you getting from moving to the cloud? What benefit are you getting from implementing AI? What benefit are you getting from analyzing your data and looking at it differently? And so during my time at Microsoft, I started taking my MBA because the first step in all of this to me was understanding business, right? You had to talk the language of the business. You need to understand how financial statements work, how revenue is derived, how that value chain is really created. And so I started my career in a bit of a different direction. I did my MBA, and then I had an opportunity after about 2.5 years at Microsoft to join industry. And so I made a bit of a leap after that. I joined a company, started as the director of business applications, and then my career just kind of catapulted from there. And a couple of years later, after being a director, I was promoted to VP, later CIO, and then stayed with that company, did a massive transformation there. And then I said, okay, you know what, let's try this again. And then I joined my current role, which is the CIO for Canada One Auto, and going in there to do another large scale technology transformation for the business. So that's kind of where my career started.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot in that, Robbie, that you talked about. You talked about going from a developer to a CIO, and I'll kind of put those as the ends for a lot of our listeners who are looking into this. But there's mentorship that's involved. There's starting your own business, being an entrepreneur. There's strategic decision making, going into and saying, I'm going to do my MBA because that's going to benefit me. So I want to pick on some of those areas because there's a lot of developers out there that look at it and say, I'm a developer, I'm a techie, and I was a developer, as you know, as well. I went to school for computer science, and I navigated and found my way towards other areas. But a lot of them get stuck. What's your advice there in terms of, one, identifying this isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life, and then two, where the opportunities are? I'd love to understand those aspects because I think those are going to be really essential for anyone who's at that stage now contemplating and debating what that next roadmap looks like. And that vision of developer to CIO, I think what you've just painted is possible and you've walked that journey. So I'd love to get some context on that, please.
Yeah, you know what? I have a bit of I'll call it a controversial thought around this. I guess I'll put it that way to put it lightly. There's a lot of people in the industry right now. When you look at it, the introduction of different technology, whether you look at AI, you look at what Chat GPT is doing to the industry and how things are changing. So whether you're a knowledge worker or a content creator, all of these other technologies that is coming up and moving very quickly through the industry is going to have an impact on your role. So one of the things I talk a lot about right now is, and again, this might be controversial, but the day of the knowledge worker is really dead, right? And when you think of who a knowledge worker is, that is a lot of the people who are coming up in programming and coding and basic content creation. Like those days are really going away because we're automating a lot of that. AI is coming in, and nowadays you don't even need to code anything. You could actually get AI to do a lot of that, right? So the day of the knowledge worker is dead. What is really turning into is the day of the value creator. How are you actually adding value to an organization as you move forward? Now, not to say those people coming out of school today who are developers and programmers, they're not going to have a job waiting for them, but it is getting harder. I coach a lot of young students today, and they're struggling. I was actually at a party the other day, and I was talking to someone who's graduating from the U of A, and they don't have a job lined up anymore. Like it is that hard in the industry to actually get a job. Where, think about it, like 10 years ago, it was easy for us to get jobs, right? You come out of anything in the technology sector and you'll be scooped up right away. And then COVID accelerated that a little bit because everyone went remote. A lot of companies were ramping up and escalating their roadmap and just moving a lot faster, or accelerating their roadmap rather. But we've seen this pivotal shift happen in the entire industry. So when you think about what it is to move from entry level kind of developer roles to CIO, you really need to find that niche that is, how do you add value? And if you can find how you add value to a company, then you will skyrocket through your career.
I love that, Robbie. And I think, again, you unpacked a lot of different things there. I mean, the challenges in the industry, they're significant. Let's call it for what it is, especially given the tech layoffs that happened in the past couple of years, massive, which has flooded the market with so much technical talent that the competitiveness to get back into organizations is very difficult at this stage. But the one area that I think you touched on was adding value, providing value to an organization. And one thing I'll go back to, and I've shared this in a couple of my other episodes, my father always taught me, he said, listen, if you're going to ever work for someone, work there as if it's your own company. And, having the experience that you have as an entrepreneur, going in with the skill sets that you have, I have no doubt that you've been looking at solving these problems as if it's your own little business that you're working towards. And I think I would like to share that, with our listeners, especially some of the younger generation ones that are looking and say, what do I do? It's like, go in with everything you've got. You all have strength. You all have superpowers that you can actually tap into. But we think that we have to follow these instructions at work, and that's like the little bubble that we have to live in. You can break that bubble. You can go beyond that. And part of my success, even at Microsoft, was contributed to that, because even though an organization the size of Microsoft has guardrails for what you need to do, you can poke your head out and say, hey, can I go try this? And what happens if I do this? Can it help enhance the business in any way? And I've done that a couple times. Even though it was outside of my reach, you have to go through approvals and you get pushback, but you stay persistent with it. But your thoughts on just that value creation and how someone can identify how they can uniquely position themselves to provide value, if there's anything that you have there from your own learnings.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. And one of the biggest items that I'll talk a little bit about right now is the fact that, you talked about it. We're trained, or a lot of people are trained to go into organizations and just follow the rules, right? They're given a set of instructions, they're given a mandate or something to go accomplish. And the number one thing I tell a lot of people today is this industry is not one where you can just follow the rules anymore. You have to weigh the pros and cons of different decisions, and you have to take calculated risks, right? So there is an opportunity now. If you're not going to take a risk and you're just going to follow the instructions, that's not adding value to companies, because that's not experimenting. That's not looking at what's out there. That's not looking at outside the black box. And so one of the biggest things I always encourage people to do is take calculated risks. Your entire career, if you're going to live within a bubble and just kind of only go within the confines or boundaries of that bubble, you're never going to really be stand out, or you're never going to make yourself visible. So take the calculated risks. Again, I say calculated, so you have to be really careful with that. But you want to take those risks, right? You want to jump out and you want to try some new things and experiment and learn from those things if they do fail, right? There's always that saying, implement quickly, fail fast, and all those sort of things. But you have to take away some lessons from that so that you could apply it the next time. And so I think when we look at things like value creation, it's all about taking calculated risks on how you can benefit an organization or your own business. You have to take some risks throughout your career.
Absolutely. And, in through all of those calculated risks, so just don't go in and start, try to make anything and everything happen. Those risks have to be calculated, because some of them could lead to termination depending on what those risks are. Seek guidance. One of the examples that I had a drastic change in the education sector at Microsoft is that I went and surveyed the management, the leadership team, the account execs that were engaged in the accounts and said, listen, this is a problem that I am seeing within this space. And do you also see the same problem? And, and some of them came back and said, yeah, TJ, we've been trying to solve this for 2.5, 3 years. So I went back and said, are you guys okay if I help solve this problem? Because I think I've got some avenues that we can pursue. They laughed. They said, yeah, good luck, because I was new to the education space. But it brought a new perspective, Robbie. Mm-hmm. Literally within 2.5 to 3 months, I solved the problem that they were looking to solve for past 2 to 3 years. 100%. And I won't get into the details of it, but it was just a matter of new perspective, getting buy-in. It was taking that risk. If I had assumed that, the people that have been tenured there for 20 years and 15 years prior to what I'm coming in with, if they couldn't solve it, I can't do it. That's the wrong mindset. It's like, let me get a different lens on it, different perspective. We all bring our own skills and abilities. And to your point, calculated risk, go and seek the approval of the folks that need to solve this problem. And if they also identify it as a problem, and then go after it. And now you're bringing them in with you. They're supporting you through it. And you're not, feeling like a lone ranger who's trying to go out and change the world. Instead, it's a team effort that you're kind of winning with. So just some, feedback to share on your calculated risk aspect, because that is important, because you can get in trouble depending on what that risk component is.
100%.
Robbie, you've touched
one.
Yes, go ahead, please.
One thing I was going to add on to what you said there, but is very unique in our industry today, is the individuals that can actually go out and talk to the business, right? The ones who can actually bridge the gap between technology and business value and what drives the business is another form of business or value creation that someone can bring to the table. Because if you're able to go out to the business and bring a different perspective or get them to agree to a certain type of implementation or technology stack or whatever the case may be, but if you can talk to a business at their level of what really drives them forward, then you can add value to an organization, right? So I fully agree about the calculated risk side of it, but I think there's another hidden piece in there that we just opened up, and it's really about how you add value. And a lot of it comes into those individuals who can go out there and talk to the business and speak to them at their level to bring back those solutions.
Yeah. And, going back to my journey, I, again, went to school for computer science. But when I came out, I realized that I had an innate ability to talk to the business, to understand what their pain points were, translate that, and get the tech teams to understand what that was. So I became that middleman for many organizations. The interesting aspect of that, Robbie, is I'm talking about this going back, almost 20 years. The same problem still exists. The business does not talk to the tech, and they're still butting heads in the same way as it was back then. I haven't been that engaged and involved in the past couple of years now. But would you say it's still the same problem where the business is, leading one direction and tech is trying to solve in a whole different aspect of it? What are your thoughts there, Robbie?
I would 100% agree with you. I think it's actually one of the biggest challenges I've seen in many organizations today. I've talked to a number of CIOs, CFOs, CEOs, and I talk to them about the relationship that the IT department has with the rest of the business. And often you're finding that the relationship is fractured. There's no trust there. There's, it's more IT is either an order taker or they're not bringing recommendations to the table. And the reason for that is often because the two departments are never, or the IT group is never really in sync with the business itself, right? Because it goes back to what we were talking about before. We have a lot of people in IT today that are just really focused on the technology aspect, and they're not focused on what drives the business forward. So if you can't speak the language of your CFO or your CEO or your COO and look at what's driving the business forward, how do you ever build a trusted relationship with the business, right? My view of IT, and I actually am not a fan of the word IT because I always transform departments to be known as business technology because we want to be partners with the business. And so when you go into an organization and they're just known as the technical guys in the corner. They deal with reactive incidents. You want to make sure that you can rebuild that relationship and add value through partnering with the business and advising them of how to use technology to actually enable them to drive revenue, drive growth, or really just hit any of the strategic objectives that they are aiming for, right? So it is right now, I'm seeing it across so many organizations where IT and the business are just butting heads. And it's something that has to change.
And it's been a long time. And not only business and IT, I'll give you an example. When I actually was in Edmonton, I won't say the client or the situation, but even within IT, two different organizations or departments are not speaking to each other. And the example was the large rollout at the time. I think it was Windows 7, if I'm not mistaken. I'm dating myself. Windows 7 rollout for a large organization. And the Windows 7 team didn't realize that the System Center team could help with this rollout, but they weren't talking. So they're trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And I actually brought them both in a room and said, like, you guys don't understand that the System Center product is not just for patching. You can actually use this to roll out a whole OS and a whole platform across your organization. But the fact that these organizations or these departments were living in silos is what leads to a lot of problems, let alone the business trying to solve something when two internal IT departments or teams cannot even get together, right? So the problem still exists. And, for individuals who are trying to figure out what that opportunity is, break out, go talk to another team, find out what they do, be that person 100%. Who's actually bringing those connections together, and just be curious, right? Because there are going to be things that you just don't know as an individual. And when that curiosity comes in, you're asking questions of how do you do certain things, you will come up with solutions, but you have to get out of your comfort zone. The other aspect, Robbie, I want to touch on, you talked about mentoring quite a bit, and especially in the role that you're in, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to coach and guide and direct and instruct. I want to flip it on the other side. What impact has mentoring has had on your journey from a receiving perspective that you can share?
That's a really interesting question, because I think, if I look back at my career, I don't think there's ever been one specific mentor that's really stood out to me. I think I look back at my career, I've actually had a number of different mentors, whether most of them have been informal, I would say. But what I try to do is I try to take away aspects from all of my peers and different leaders that I'm working with and really incorporate that into what I do today, right? So I don't think there's any one specific mentor that stands out to me, but what a lot of people have said to me is about how IT needs to be talking the language of the business, right? Simplify things down to the language of the business. And that message itself has resonated for me my entire career, right? You can't have IT sitting there talking extremely technical or presenting things that are extremely technical. You need to simplify it, right? Because a lot of people don't know the intricacies of what happens behind the scenes, and they're not interested in it. That's the job of the people in the technology industry. They just want to know how this impacts their business and the value it adds to them. Does it help their bottom line? Does it help their top line? I think we just need to really take that sort of advice to heart as leaders in the technology sector, that we need to talk the language of the business. Right? So I think that's probably the biggest thing I've always taken away from anyone that I've talked to and kind of view as a mentor during my career.
Yeah, it's so critical, Robbie. I remember even at Microsoft, and we had a portal that defined what acronyms were and what they meant. So it was a mandate to a certain extent. Say, stop using acronyms. Try to simplify things, not only for our internal teams, but for our clients. And from a client perspective, I remember this conversation when my title was a TAM, or a technical account manager. We would throw around the term TAM all the time, and a business user was confused. Like, what are you talking about, TAM? Where are you guys talking about this from? And they're thinking about the total addressable market. right? So the different acronyms can mislead people. And a lot of the times I see happening in organizations is people try to use acronyms to try to empower and lift themselves up and say, I'm smarter or I know more. Let that go, right? Take that and throw it out the window and bring it down to the most simplest terms so that you can get along on the other side and then move the projects forward. When there's confusion on any state or any acronym or any position, then things don't move. And that's what I've seen as a lot of problems as well. So to your point, I think there's, the theme of this episode is really becoming more on that connection from a business to technology. And I love how you said that. It's not IT, it's business technology, right? And that's exactly what it is.
Technology so is intertwined into every department within an organization today, right? Whether you look at marketing, finance, any of the operation segments, technology is it's ingrained into everything that we do today, that as someone in the technology industry, you have to get rid of that technical jargon and make it easier for people to understand. I often draw this kind of Venn diagram, and technology is in the center of it, right? We are the one group that has to understand every aspect of the business versus when you think about an HR team or a finance team. Actually, finance I'll leave out because they're often in the same boat. But when you think of different aspects of the organization, they're focused on one pillar versus technology, because of how intertwined it is, we have to be in the center of all of that. And then to your point, if we're using things like acronyms or a lot of technical jargon, we're never going to move ahead in building relationships with all of these different groups. One of the biggest successes I've had in my career, and I'm quite proud of, is the fact that at one point I was able to lead the marketing team. So as a CIO, you don't hear it very often where a CIO is leading technology, but also marketing, right? For a retail organization, out of all things, where marketing is one of the biggest pieces of that, right? But the reason I was involved in that was because of how integrated technology is into marketing today. Everything is really about digital marketing. It's not about the paper flyers that we deliver out anymore. It's about how do we reach that customer on the digital platforms, whether it's social media, Google Ads, whatever, you name it. It's about how do we reach that. But I also attribute a lot of that success to the fact that I was able to learn that industry or that part of the business very quickly and elevate the conversation from just being about the technical platforms, the power marketing, to how do we deliver a better customer experience, or how do we target those customers, or how do we personalize the journey for those customers. And I think it's so important for everyone to understand that technology is the center of this. It doesn't matter which part of the business you're in, technology is the center of it. And you have to work with everybody in an organization to move it forward.
Absolutely. And the way I would look at it, Robbie, is that technology powers everything. Your example from a marketing perspective, technology has powered marketing in ways that they never even imagined. I say they, as in marketing teams in the past, to your example of, throwing these flyers out and not being able to understand who's picked it up, who's used it, it's just a broadcast of a message versus digital. You can actually now measure who's clicked on it, what the click-through rates are, who's looking at your ads or your promotions, whatever have you. You can actually measure it, and that only happens with technology. And it's phenomenal how much it's changed the game. I mean, if you look at Instagram, the number of ads that you're seeing, or even Facebook or Google, this is all digital marketing now. But the ads that are coming in, I remember when I was running my e-commerce business, it was the same thing. You could actually measure precisely the cost per click that you were going to be charged because of the amounts of data that these platforms already had on the customers, on your target audience, etc. And you can start measuring that and predicting that. Whereas with flyers, you can print 1,000 and 1,000 could fall and land somewhere and you have no idea. Or 1,000 get distributed and you still have no way of measuring where these people came from. So technology is the core of all of this, to your point, but that gives us an advantage is that you can actually go around and provide input and insight into other teams and departments, going back to that value creator that you're talking about, because of the
100%.
access that we have. Those departments don't have that access. They don't see it the same way.
100%. And I mean, you look at everything in an organization today, every department, for most organizations, I should say, are really powered by data, right? And who controls the underlying data? It's obviously the technology teams that decide how to store it, how to extract it, how to essentially transform that data, right? So when you think about technology and you think of business intelligence and data analytics that are driving a lot of these different departments today, the technology team needs to understand how they work and how they're driven so that they can even produce from a BI standpoint, right? So technology is so intertwined in all of this. It is the underlying, it drives every one of these businesses. As they go forward, technology goes forward, right? So it is, to your point, it's 100% involved. It drives everything right now.
It's only going to get more and more ingrained with every aspect of it, especially now with AI coming in. And your statement about the days of let me see what you wrote there. I'm going to quote that exactly. The days of the knowledge worker are dead, right? Like it's almost game over, because a lot of that stuff, even from ChatGPT alone, and I've been training and coaching organizations on ChatGPT. It's almost like I have all these little interns as my little knowledge workers that say, hey, go do this, and go find this. Even prepping for my episodes, a lot of that strategy comes in from ChatGPT, where I've structured and say, hey, listen, this is the information I'm looking for. This is the structure of the show. Now help me, brainstorm around this. I don't need to go and find someone, hire someone, and get them to do all of this. I do this in a matter of minutes, literally minutes, for any episode, any show, which a year and a half ago was unimaginable, right? You have to really get down and plan things out and structure things out. It's still doing that, but it's happening at much rapid, faster rate.
100%. And if you can even add on top of that, when you think about from a marketing perspective, like, let's see, how are you marketing TTalks, right? So you could go to AI and ChatGPT and look at things about and asking it the questions of build me a marketing plan. And 9 out of 10 times, it's actually fairly close to what a real marketing team would build out, right? When you think about those sort of things, we're moving at a much, much faster pace. But the day of those knowledge workers who were ingrained in those tasks, I think, are coming to an end in the near future. Now, I could be wrong, could be 5 years, 10 years, could be a little while. But the pace that we're accelerating in technology, I think we are getting close to that line. And, I was listening to someone's talk the other day, and it's interesting. A question came up during their talk that, what are we preparing our kids for? What jobs are they going to have when they're growing up and going through school, right? And that really stuck with me because I'm thinking about it for my own girls. Like, what are they going to do next, right? If we're automating everything going forward, what are they going to focus on? So it is really driving that piece of be a value creator, right? Add value to organizations and find ways to add value, because that's where it's all going.
Absolutely. And this is going to take me into our next segment, which is the decision-making aspect, whether it's for your kids at home, whether it's for the business decisions you're making, Robbie. What does that look like? Or even the personal ones that you went from, one organization to transform to get the MBA. There's a huge component of decision-making. It's not something you just wake up and say, this is what I'm going to do. You talked about calculated risks, and I'm going to change it to calculated decision-making, because knowing you the way you are, you do put things in perspective. You do have a thorough run of it. Love to understand that a little bit about from yourself. What does that look like for Robbie? When you're going through a tough decision, what does that journey look like that you walk yourself through?
That's a really interesting question. Quite a loaded question too, depending on the significance of the decision that you're trying to make, right? A lot of my process specifically is to reach out to experts in the field. I like doing my research. Anyone that knows me is I'm the most detail-oriented person. I like planning things out, and I like researching everything down to the details. I've actually built a lot of my career around learning from the ground up. That way I understand every process, everything that's done in an organization. As I recently entered a new organization as a CIO, I'm still starting at the ground up and I'm learning everything about the infrastructure, the different aspects of the technology side of it, but I'm also learning everything about how the business processes work, right? And that factors into the decision-making process, because if you understand things from end to end, you know what's at risk, what the pros and cons are of those decisions, and you can make an educated decision from that. So understanding the processes, understanding the details is a huge part of my decision-making method, I guess. The other aspect to it is really around just, honestly, I like talking to people. I like understanding their perspective. We talked about it earlier, right? A lot of it is understanding everyone's perspective because everyone brings a different outlook on things. And so you have to take that in as an input to your decision-making process, because you never know, you'll never look at it the same as someone else, and they can bring to light something that you would never have thought of. Right. So whether it's in my personal life, whether it's career wise, I think a lot of it comes into understanding the end to end and transparently. Sometimes you need smarter people in the room than you or I, and we ask them a lot of the questions, right, and get their input into how things work. And we use all of that together to make our final decision.
Absolutely. And, and we always talk about, having not being the smartest person in the room or those examples, but I've never looked at myself being the smart person in the room because I don't want to be in that room. I want to be able to learn. Yes, I've got certain aspects of my own abilities and my own skills that I've developed, but there's so many others that I have not tapped into that I can leverage others for. So I love that aspect of it. And I think that's what we have to, put our egos aside and I know these acronyms and I know put all that aside, go in, be curious, right? Be curious, trying to understand. And once you start enabling that curiosity of yours and you're genuinely curious, people are going to have conversations with you that are going to open opportunities. They're going to open opportunities. My whole business, if you think about it, started from curiosity. When I started teaching my Inbox Zero training, I had developed it for myself. And I saw others struggling, even at Microsoft. And I went back and said, hey, do you guys need help with this? Some said yes, and some said no. And the ones that said yes, I kind of coached them around it. And I went from coaching maybe 2 to 3 people to, 20s and 30s to a couple of hundred to 7,000 in one session, right? So all of that happened because of curiosity. I could have kept my knowledge to myself and I could have sat with it and said, hey, I'm going to grow and develop because I can do all of this. Or I got curious and started asking and seeing, am I the only one facing this problem? And that brought me into now running a business where this is what I'm helping organizations with. So there's something to be said about curiosity and being open and genuinely trying to help. And it goes back to, what my dad said, be the entrepreneur in that role that you're in. And that's when that curiosity comes in, because you're trying to solve new problems. You're trying to find new avenues to get to.
I think it's interesting because I think anyone who enters a room with kind of the smartest person in the room mentality or that mindset that they are always right, those are leaders that you don't want to follow those types of leaders. I guess I'll put it bluntly, right? You want to follow the leaders who are asking questions, the ones who are continuously learning, because none of us know everything out there, right? Whether it's about technology at the fast pace it's changing, whether it's about different business aspects, we never know it all. So you have to keep learning. And that's the only way we all get better together, right? And I teach my team that quite often is ask the questions. They might be stupid questions. Actually, I should rephrase that. There's never a stupid question, right? It's just but if you don't ask the question and you're making assumptions, you might get it wrong, right? So it's always better to ask the question, and it doesn't matter if someone thinks it's a stupid question. Just ask the question anyways, right? I think we all need to learn, and that's the only way for us to move forward.
Absolutely. And I want to touch on, just before we go into our rapid fire question segment, the one thing that you said, the people that know it all, I don't think they're essentially leaders. either, if you think about it. Because to your point, you said, I don't want to follow them. I don't want to be with them. That's not who I want to be around. So essentially, they're really not leading. They have a position they hold. They got to that position, but they're not really leading by definition. Mm-hmm. A leader doesn't take input from their people. A leader doesn't just go in and command people what to do. And I shared this in one of my clips prior, is that you want to be the leader. Like Sam Altman, for example, when he was let go from the organization, his organization followed him. That's a leader, right? Where someone is going, irrespective. They didn't know what his future was going to be after that, but they're like, we're going wherever he's going. Like, that's the true leader that you want to be with, as opposed to if someone gets fired, everyone's super happy and joyful that this guy's gone or this girl's gone. So, going back to what you said, I think the definition of a leader is someone that really cares and leads by example and by listening and by empathy, and not necessarily by commanding.
Well, it's interesting because you think about it, like if you look at a lot of departments today or businesses today, often the team is a mirror image of their leader, right? Because a leader often hires in their own image and so on. So think about it. If you have a leader who's quite closed off and thinks they're always right and not learning anything about the business or the environment that they're in, that means their team is not going to be learning anything new about the environment that they're in, and that they're always going to do stuff the same way. And if we think about that, going back to our previous conversations around how departments are often siloed, that's what creates an IT department that is siloed today, right? Because they're not talking to people, they're not learning, they're not out there learning new things and asking those questions. So in a lot of organizations, you need to have leaders at the top who are the most humble people, right? They need to be out there. They need to be asking those questions, and they need to be learning, because then that just goes down into the team, right? And the entire team becomes in that same splitting image, and they all start learning the business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Robbie, thank you for that. Now it's time for our rapid fire segment. So I'm going to give you a number of questions. And the rule is simple. You're just going to respond with the first thing that comes to mind. So, you ready for this?
This will be interesting.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll make it easy. I'll make it easy for the first one. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Okay. What's the last book you read that had significant impact on you?
I don't actually know. I've gone away from reading a lot of books recently to doing a lot more around podcasts now. So okay. I'm trying to think of a book that I've read in the last little while.
You can label a podcast if you like. That sticks out. You can say TTalks. I'll be more than happy with that.
There we go. TTalks. Top of my mind right now. Let's go with that.
All right. Your wake-up time.
So that's actually something that's in flux right now, but I'm going to say 6:30.
Okay. Electric or gas vehicle?
Electric.
Okay. Which tech leader or innovator, past or present, would you most like to contribute on a project with?
So this would be an interesting question. There are so many that come to mind. That's a tough rapid fire question. There are so many leaders that I would have loved to be a part of. What's the first one coming to your mind?
What's the first one coming to your mind?
I'm going to say Bill Gates. He revolutionized the industry. It changed everything. I'll say Bill Gates.
So if Bill Gates is listening, we know who we're going to pair up for the next project then, right?
And I'm ex-Microsoft, so come on.
Exactly. That's awesome. If you could steal a superhero's power, which would it be?
The Flash. I think there are so many things that I want to get done that there's just not enough time in the day to get them done. So I would say the Flash. I could get way more accomplished.
What's something that you're really good at that most people don't know about? And don't say NHL, because I have proof on that one there.
We'll do a rematch of NHL at some point. That's an interesting one. I honestly think that my quick answer is just how calm I am. You will never see me You'll never see a ton of panic on my face or anger or anything. I remain calm.
Amazing. And that's a great quality to have as a leader, because then you can really assess and comb through things rather than making in the heat of the moment decisions, right? So I always say respond rather than react, right? And that's a good testament to that.
Well, you don't want to make any decisions based on emotion, right? That's the hardest thing, and a lot of leaders today base decisions on emotion. One of the most humbling comments I've gotten back from a lot of team members or even other departments out there that I've worked with is how they admire how calm I am in certain situations, right? And it was so humbling for me to hear that, because it's just part of my human nature, just to be calm. As much as things could be blowing up around me, my goal is always to just solve the problem and not try to react to it, right? Just let's get it done. Let's figure out how to solve the issue and let's move forward. So it was really humbling for me to hear from a lot of people how they admired how calm I was in those sort of situations. So.
I love that. Robbie. And the last question we've got is, if animals could talk, which would you want to have a conversation with?
The dinosaurs. Let's bring back the dinosaurs, and I want to hear what happened.
I love it. Robbie, thank you very much for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been a true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping our future. Until next time, keep on inspiring.